The morning sun had risen high over the arid training grounds, casting its harsh light across the vast military encampment in the American Southwest. Heat shimmered off the sand, and a dry wind rustled the canvas flaps of the general purpose (GP) tent, making it groan with every gust. Inside, the tent was a microcosm of chaos and routine, Marines moving about briskly, some hauling supplies, others checking manifests, while the faint hum of conversation mixed with laughter, complaints, and the occasional barked order from a superior. The air smelled of sweat leather, and the faint tang of antiseptic from the first aid supplies stacked neatly in the corner. Staff Sergeant Cole, a man known for both his towering physical presence and his relentless sense of humor, strode into the tent like a storm cloud with a grin. His uniform, impeccably neat even in the desert heat, seemed to radiate authority, but his eyes betrayed a mischievous spark. He surveyed the room with practiced scrutiny, nodding at familiar faces, exchanging quick jokes, and assessing the energy of the morning. But his gaze soon fell upon a figure slightly apart from the rest, quietly arranging medical supplies with careful precision. Cole's lips twisted into a grin that promised mischief. Brooks was new to this unit, a recent transfer who had already earned a reputation for his quiet efficiency and unwavering composure. He was tall but lean, with the wiry strength of someone accustomed to long nights and hard labor. His dark hair was slightly tousled from sleep, and his uniform, while neat, bore faint creases suggesting hurried dressing in the early hours. But what struck Cole most was not his appearance, but the calm that radiated from him, a stark contrast to the loud, rowdy energy of the tent. His brown eyes, focused and deliberate, scanned the supplies, mentally checking inventories and noting minor discrepancies, his hands moving with practiced ease. He was a single father, a fact unknown to most around him, carrying the invisible weight of responsibility for a child he loved more than anything in the world. Cole leaned casually against a table, arms crossed, and watched for a long moment. Then, as if unable to resist temptation, he called out in a voice that carried over the clamor of the tent, "Well, well, well, look who decided to join the circus. Private reporting for duty, sir." A ripple of laughter spread through the nearby Marines, some glancing over in curiosity, others shaking their heads with amusement. His hands paused mid-motion, and he gave a polite, restrained smile, his eyes never leaving the stack of bandages he was organizing. He had learned early that ignoring the teasing often carried more weight than reacting to it. Cole stepped closer, the grin widening. "I mean seriously, Brooks," he continued, pretending to scrutinize a clipboard. "I've seen toddlers with more authority than you. What's your secret? Counting Cheerios or memorizing bedtime stories?" Laughter erupted louder this time, and a few Marines elbowed each other, trying not to snort at the joke. The expression remained calm, almost serene, but inside he felt the familiar tug of irritation. He was no stranger to being underestimated, life had taught him that much. But he also knew that responding with anger here would play right into the hands of someone like Cole. Patience, he reminded himself, had always been his ally. Around them, the GP tent buzzed with activity. Corporal Martinez was moving first aid kits toward the back, occasionally muttering complaints about the heat. Private Johnson was fussing with radio equipment, cursing softly under his breath as the antenna refused to cooperate. In one corner, Sergeant Lee was giving a quick briefing to a small group of newer recruits, gesturing animatedly while the others scribbled notes. And through it all, worked quietly, taking note of minor injuries, checking bandage inventories, and ensuring that the day's routine would run smoothly. His presence was subtle, almost invisible, yet essential, the kind of reliability that only became evident when things went wrong. Cole, not one to leave a challenge unanswered, leaned in even closer to, lowering his voice to a theatrical whisper that carried just enough to be heard by several Marines nearby. "Hey, Dad," he said, his tone dripping with faux seriousness. "If you ever need a promotion, I hear the diaper division is hearing. You crush it. Leadership, empathy, organizational skills. Sounds like your resume to me." He let out a loud guffaw at his own joke, slapping the table for effect. The surrounding Marines laughed again, though a few exchanged subtle glances, unsure whether to intervene. Jaw tightened just slightly, but his voice remained calm, and even as he replied, "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. I'll keep that in mind." Inside the quiet determination of memories flickered nights spent putting his son to bed, balancing late-night homework help with shifts at the hospital, managing all the household responsibilities single-handedly while still maintaining the discipline required by his military service. Those nights had been long, quiet, and often lonely, but they had built him into the man standing here, steady and unshaken despite the teasing that came with a new posting. He had faced ridicule before, but he had learned the value of measured composure, of letting actions speak louder than words, and of holding on to his own sense of purpose even when misunderstood by others. Cole, oblivious to the weight behind his quiet demeanor, continued his performance, striding around the tent and delivering playful jabs to anyone who would listen. "Watch out, everyone," he called, pointing at with mock alarm. "He's got the power to rock the cradle and run the triage table. Fear him." The Marines nearby chuckled, some shaking their heads at Cole's antics. Yet beneath the humor, an undercurrent of curiosity began to form. Something about his calm, unwavering presence seemed to demand a second glance, even from those accustomed to loud personalities and commanding voices. As the morning progressed, the tent's rhythm unfolded like a well-rehearsed dance. Marines moved with purpose, calls were answered, inventories checked, and schedules coordinated. Yet through the constant activity remained a quiet anchor. He handed out medical supplies, offered concise advice to the younger medics, and ensured that everyone was accounted for, all while maintaining a low profile. His composure in the chaos was almost magnetic, drawing subtle admiration from some and quiet envy from others. Cole, meanwhile, had taken note of the glances received, though he dismissed them as irrelevant for now. By mid-morning, the heat in the tent had intensified, causing sweat to bead on foreheads and uniforms to cling uncomfortably to skin. Despite this, worked tirelessly, methodically moving from one task to another, a living demonstration of efficiency under pressure. Cole, sensing that the morning banter had yet to reach its peak, leaned over once more, loudly remarking, "I hope you brought your storybooks, Brooks. You'll need them to teach these guys about courage and nap time." Laughter exploded, louder and more sustained this time, echoing off the tent walls. Merely nodded, his calmness unshaken, though the eyes of several Marines now lingered on him longer than before. Even amidst the teasing, a subtle tension began to build, not the kind caused by fear or anger, but the quiet curiosity of those witnessing a man who bore both his personal and professional burdens with dignity. His presence was a quiet testament to resilience, and though few could articulate it yet, something about him suggested that the morning's playful ridicule might one day be replaced with respect earned not by loud words or commanding rank, but by quiet competence and unflinching character. And so the stage was set. In the sweltering heat of the GP tent, under the laughter and light-hearted mockery of Staff Sergeant Cole, a quiet battle of perception and respect had begun. Brooks, the single father and dedicated medic, was ready to prove, not with jokes, not with loud declarations, but through action, that strength was not measured by the volume of one's voice, the number of stripes on one's sleeve, or the ease with which one could incite laughter, but by the depth of courage and quiet resilience carried in the heart. The morning wore on, and the sun climbed higher, baking the GP tent under its relentless glare. Sweat clung to the backs of Marines, the smell of exertion mixing with the tang of antiseptic and dust. Inside the tent, the chatter had shifted. What had started as light morning banter was now hunting in on one individual, Brooks. Staff Sergeant Cole, ever the, seemed determined to test the limits of his composure, his loud voice cutting across the room like a whip. Cole leaned casually against a stack of med kits, eyes narrowing as he watched methodically check supplies. "Hey, Brooks," he called, voice dripping with mock alarm. "How's it feel to be the lowest-ranking man in the tent? You're like the understudy in the theater of life." A few Marines nearby snickered, nudging each other, while others tried not to laugh out loud, sensing the predictable escalation. Continued his work, adjusting bandages and counting medical supplies, offering nothing more than a polite nod. His calm refusal to respond only seemed to fuel Cole's energy. Cole wasn't content with a single jab. He prowled around the tent like a lion circling an unassuming gazelle, hands gesturing dramatically. "I mean seriously," he continued, voice rising for effect. "This guy could probably handle a toddler army better than we handle a firefight. Private to the rescue." The tent erupted in laughter. A few of the younger Marines gasped, clutching their stomachs, while seasoned veterans shook their heads with weary amusement. Still, his focus never wavered. He moved with quiet authority, ignoring the performance, his brown eyes scanning for small issues, a frayed bandage here, an empty supply shelf there. Despite the teasing, his mind was elsewhere. His son Liam came to him in fragments of thought, images of messy breakfast tables, mismatched socks, and bedtime stories flickering through his mind. He had left Liam sleeping that morning, unaware of how long the heat of the day would push him in the field. Memories of sleepless nights, balancing med-school, training exercises, and parenting had forged him into a man who did not rely on rank or loud authority to earn respect. He had learned early and often that patience, consistency, and quiet competence mattered more than words, or even appearance. Cole, oblivious to the internal struggles carried, pressed on. He grabbed a small medical kit and tapped it with exaggerated theatrics. "Look at him, sorting bandages like a toddler with a puzzle. I bet he reads bedtime stories to his own troops every night. Watch out, this one's armed with alphabet blocks and first aid manuals." Laughter spread, louder now, bouncing off the canvas walls. A few Marines exchanged quick glances, recognizing the routine. Cole had a tendency to amplify jokes for dramatic effect, and his victims were usually skilled enough to shrug it off. But something about his calm, unshakable demeanor made Cole's barbs feel sharper somehow. As the teasing continued, whispers began to snake through the tent. "Did you hear he's a single dad?" one Marine murmured. "Yeah, that explains the quietness. Maybe he's soft," another replied, shaking his head. Cole overheard snippets, his grin widening as he added fuel to the fire. "Oh, you heard right," he shouted theatrically. "Single dad Brooks doesn't just save lives, he probably negotiates nap times, meal schedules, and homework battles like a general." A few Marines laughed nervously, unsure if they were laughing at Cole or out of sympathy for. Meanwhile, his hands moved steadily, counting supplies and checking for discrepancies in the medical kits. Despite the humor aimed at him, his calm exterior hid a simmering tension. He felt the sting of the jokes, yes, but he also recognized their predictability. Cole had always teased, and he would continue to do so. It was part of his personality, part of the energy of the tent. What mattered was how he responded. Knew that a single sharp retort might escalate into unnecessary confrontation, and that discipline, both his own and the Marines', had to take precedence over pride. Deep down, he was waiting for the right moment, the moment when his actions would speak louder than words. The morning's exercises only heightened the tent's chaotic energy. Marines filed in and out, carrying equipment, checking logs, and exchanging quick-fire comments about drills and schedules. Cole's teasing became more inventive. He grabbed a medical chart and waved it in front of. "Look, everyone," he shouted. "Brooks here is studying pediatric care because obviously that's the key to survival in the field. Forget combat tactics, just learn the ABCs." Laughter rippled, louder and longer than before. Yet's response was the same, calm, composed, and unwavering. His eyes flicked briefly toward Cole, not with anger but with measured assessment, a silent promise that actions, not words, would reveal his true strength. As the minutes ticked by, some Marines began to notice the contrast. While Cole's energy dominated the tent, his quiet diligence drew subtle attention. He moved seamlessly between tasks, checking supplies, advising new medics on proper procedure, and ensuring that every kit was stocked and accounted for. Though the jokes continued, Some Marines began to see a pattern. His composure was not weakness but discipline. His skill was not loud or boastful but thorough and precise. Whispers shifted from ridicule to curiosity. Who was this quiet medic, and why did he command attention without saying a word? His thoughts wandered briefly, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. Nights spent comforting Liam after nightmares, mornings rising before dawn to study and prepare, and years balancing single parenthood with military service had forged resilience and quiet leadership. He had learned to carry burdens without complaint, to let actions speak louder than words, and to prioritize what truly mattered. He knew that eventually those around him would recognize his strength, not through rank or loudness, but through consistency, care, and competence. Cole, sensing that was no ordinary target, leaned in for one final jab before the morning drill. "Hey, Brooks, make sure you schedule playtime after the med check. I wouldn't want you to forget your most important duty, making sure your little troops don't revolt." Laughter erupted again, louder than ever. However, remained calm. He simply nodded, offering a small smile and returning to his work. There was a quiet fire in his eyes, a readiness to prove, not with words but with action, that the respect of the tent was earned in deeds, not in jokes. By late morning, the GP tent had transformed from a place of casual banter to a subtle stage of observation. Marines glanced at with quiet admiration, some trying to hide it, others overtly intrigued. Cole's jokes continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. The humor now coexisted with recognition that was more than the sum of his rank, his status, or his quiet demeanor. He was a man of resilience, skill, and unspoken leadership. And while the tent was still alive with laughter, an undercurrent of respect had begun to flow, waiting for the moment when it would fully surface. As the morning drills began, the heat pressing relentlessly against the canvas of the tent continued his work. Bandages were counted, supplies organized, and minor injuries treated with quiet precision. Each action reinforced what many had begun to suspect. He was reliable, competent, and strong not in words but in character. Cole, despite his constant teasing, began to sense this shift. He noticed the glances of other Marines, the quiet nods of approval, and the subtle deference that was starting to form around his presence. The stage was set. What began as a typical morning in a GP tent, hot, noisy, and filled with teasing, had quietly transformed into a crucible. In the sweltering heat, under laughter and mockery, Brooks was preparing to reveal a deeper strength, one that could not be challenged by jokes or rank alone. The tent, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface, hummed with life, unaware that soon, one quiet man would command its full attention, not through humor, not through bravado, but through courage, skill, and the quiet authority born of resilience and love. The afternoon sun had climbed high over the desert, and the heat inside the GP tent had become almost oppressive. Marines were drenched in sweat, uniforms sticking uncomfortably to their backs as they moved supplies, tended to minor injuries, and prepared for the next training rotation. Amid the usual clatter of boots and the occasional barked orders, a new kind of tension had begun to simmer, one that wasn't born of physical exertion or the heat, but of curiosity, speculation, and whispered judgments. Staff Sergeant Cole had spent the morning in his usual style, teasing, bantering, and testing the patience of his fellow Marines. But today, he had singled out Brooks with particular fervor. "Hey, Dad," he shouted for what felt like the 100th time, gesturing toward while fanning the tent with a clipboard as though the papers contained the world's secrets. "Make sure you check those bandages carefully. Don't let your little troops go unprepared for nap time." The surrounding Marines laughed again, but this time, some of the laughter carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. They were beginning to notice calm, almost unflappable demeanor. Whispers began to spread throughout the tent, quiet at first, then growing louder. "Did you hear he's a single dad?" muttered Private Lewis, glancing toward while arranging medical supplies. "I heard it's true, maybe that explains why he's so quiet," came the reply from Private, folding bandages with a nervous edge. "Yeah, and he's new to our unit, wonder if he's even cut out for the field." The whispers continued to circulate, fueled by curiosity and a tendency to fill gaps in knowledge with speculation. The rumors were not mean-spirited at first, but there was a hint of judgment, a subtle questioning of strength and competence based solely on what little the Marines knew about his life. Cole, sensing an opportunity, seized the moment. "Oh, you heard right, boys," he exclaimed, waving his arms dramatically. "Brooks here is not only saving lives but managing an entire household. Don't be fooled by the quiet demeanor. He probably has a color-coded chore chart at home that would make a drill instructor weep in envy." Laughter exploded across the tent, and a few Marines elbowed each other, barely containing their amusement. Yet, as the jokes continued, an invisible line began to form. Some of the younger soldiers, unfamiliar with the backstory, began to see as soft or inexperienced, someone who might struggle under pressure. But as always, remained calm. He moved through the tent with steady precision, checking supplies, arranging medical kits, and making small corrections where necessary. His hands worked quickly and efficiently, but his eyes remained alert, scanning for any potential issues that could jeopardize the day's drills. While the rumors swirled, he focused on what he could control: the tangible details of his work, the lives of those around him, and the responsibility he bore both as a soldier and as a father. Each small action was deliberate, a quiet demonstration of competence that few had yet fully recognized. Despite the humor and speculation, some of the Marines began to notice subtle signs of his capabilities. When a bandage was misplaced, he corrected it without fuss. When a minor injury needed treatment, he administered it with skill and calm assurance. He spoke softly to new medics, offering advice without condescension, correcting mistakes without anger. Each act was a reminder that true leadership and competence were not always loud or overt. Sometimes, they were quietly consistent, evident only to those who paid attention. A few observant Marines exchanged glances, beginning to see that perhaps their initial judgments were premature. Cole, oblivious to the quiet admiration forming around, continued to escalate the teasing. He grabbed a small medical chart and waved it in the air. "Everyone, watch carefully," he shouted. "Brooks here is teaching the ABCs of battlefield medicine. Forget combat tactics. It's all about alphabet blocks and bedtime stories." The tent erupted in laughter once more, however, responded only with a polite nod and a measured smile. Inside, he allowed himself a brief flash of amusement at the absurdity of Cole's theatrics, but he quickly refocused on the tasks at hand. Every Marine in the tent was being observed, every kit inspected, every detail accounted for. His calmness remained unbroken. As the whispers about his personal life continued, his mind drifted for a moment to Liam, his young son. He pictured the boy playing with blocks, reading his favorite stories, and laughing after a day of school. Those memories, though fleeting, reminded him why he had chosen the path he had. Being a single father had shaped every decision he had made. The jobs he accepted, the shifts he worked, and even the way he approached his military service. He had chosen flexibility and presence over rapid promotion, preferring to ensure he could always return home to his son rather than chase rank or accolades. This quiet strength, built on love and responsibility, was something no teasing or speculation could diminish. Meanwhile, Cole noticed subtle glances exchanged between and a few other Marines. "What are they looking at?" he muttered under his breath, puzzled. He had assumed the laughter and the jokes were the end of the matter, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting in the tent's energy. Some Marines were watching with a new curiosity, some with admiration, and a few with quiet skepticism at Cole's relentless teasing. For the first time that day, Cole felt a flicker of uncertainty. Had he underestimated the quiet medic? The afternoon wore on and the heat grew more oppressive. Despite the chaos, remained focused. He treated minor injuries, advised medics on protocol, and ensured that all equipment was in order. His movements were efficient, precise, and purposeful, and the contrast between his calm composure and Cole's loud antics became increasingly apparent. Marines who had initially doubted him began to notice. This was a man who carried responsibility not for show, but because he genuinely understood its weight. The whispers about his personal life, once tinged with judgment, began to lose their edge as his actions spoke volumes about his character. Yet even as respect slowly began to build, the teasing continued. Cole, determined to maintain his dominance in the tense social hierarchy, leaned over and delivered another jab. "I hope you're taking notes, Brooks," he shouted. "One day you might have to teach other soldiers how to behave like responsible adults, or at least how to survive without crying over a bedtime story." Laughter followed, but remained unshaken. He paused for a moment, then offered a quiet smile, his eyes meeting Cole, with a calm intensity that conveyed more than words ever could. He was capable, prepared, and more resilient than anyone realized. By late afternoon, the tent had settled into a rhythm. Marines moved with purpose, carrying out assignments, checking equipment, and preparing for the next phase of training. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle transformation had taken place. The whispers, once fueled by speculation, had begun to shift toward genuine curiosity and quiet respect. Some Marines were observing calm authority, recognizing that true strength was not in the volume of one's voice or the number of stripes on a uniform, but in quiet competence, consistency, and resilience. Even Cole, unaware of the shift, felt a subtle sense of tension building, an unspoken acknowledgement that was more than he had assumed. Thoughts returned briefly to the present. Every action mattered, not only for the smooth functioning of the GP tent, but for the morale and safety of those around him. Each careful bandage placement, each precise instruction, each word of quiet guidance reinforced the idea that leadership was not always about rank, authority, or loud displays. True leadership could be quiet, steady, and invisible, but its effects were unmistakable when it mattered most. As the sun began its slow descent over the desert horizon, casting long shadows across the training grounds, the stage for transformation was quietly taking shape. Brooks, the quiet single father and dedicated medic, had weathered the teasing, the whispers, and the judgment of the tent. Yet beneath the calm exterior, something stronger was growing, the quiet strength that would soon prove itself, not in jokes or mockery, but in action, courage, and unwavering resilience. The Marines continued their work, oblivious to the fact that the morning's humor had only been a prelude. The real test, the moment when quiet authority and steadfast character would command full attention, was approaching. And when it came, the GP tent would never look at him, or anyone else, in the same way again. The desert sun was relentless, beating down on the GP tent like a hammer on steel. The sweltering heat turned the canvas walls into ovens, and sweat ran in rivulets down the backs of the Marines as they moved through the organized chaos of supplies, equipment checks, and medical preparations. The tent, usually a hub of banter and routine, felt charged with an almost tangible tension. Every laugh, every shouted order seemed sharper under the unforgiving heat. But the tension that mattered most wasn't in the weather. It was in the quiet, simmering storm between Staff Sergeant Cole and the new medic, Brooks. Cole's eyes scanned the tent like a hawk, and when they fell on, a slow, mischievous grin spread across his face. "Look alive, everybody," he barked. "Dad is on deck, ready to save lives and enforce nap time simultaneously. Watch closely, this could be historic." Some Marines snickered, some rolled their eyes, but all turned their attention toward the quiet anchor of the tent. As usual, remained calm, focused on the organization of supplies and the minor injuries he treated, never letting Cole's theatrics disrupt his work. But Cole wasn't done. He prowled closer, slapping a medical kit on the table near with a loud clang. "I hope you're hydrating properly, Brooks," he said theatrically. "Can't have you fainting from all that heavy lifting of pacifiers and bandages." Laughter erupted, louder than usual, and his jaw tightened ever so slightly. Inside, he felt the familiar sting of mockery, but he also felt a quiet resolve building. Today, he realized, was not a day for words, it was a day for action. The heat, combined with the long hours of training, was taking its toll on the Marines. Several younger soldiers began to falter under the physical strain, their movements sluggish and complaints rising. The medics, tasked with monitoring their condition, scrambled to ensure everyone remained hydrated and healthy. Moved from one Marine to another with quiet precision, offering water, checking vital signs, and quickly tending to heat-related symptoms. His calm authority began to stand out. While Cole continued his relentless teasing, some of the Marines noticed the juxtaposition. The loud jokes of the staff sergeant contrasted sharply with quiet, competent efficiency. Cole, sensing that composure was more than just politeness, decided to escalate. "Hey, Brooks," he shouted, slapping the table again. "If you survive this drill without collapsing, I might just promote you to Chief Baby Wrangler. You're handling the heat better than these guys, sure, but can you handle an army of tantrums back home?" Laughter rippled through the tent, louder and more sustained this time. Some Marines laughed out of habit, others out of genuine amusement. A few, however, began to notice a subtle shift. His calm efficiency was slowly earning quiet admiration, even as Cole tried to dominate the room with humor. Didn't respond with words. He simply moved through the tent with measured, precise actions. A Marine complaining of dizziness was guided to shade, given water, and observed with the care of someone who had seen exhaustion before. Another Marine, suffering a minor scrape, was treated efficiently, his uniform patched and bandage applied in record time. Hands were steady, his voice calm, and his attention unwavering. The contrast between Cole's loud teasing and his quiet competence could not have been more stark. Marines began to glance at him differently, the seed of respect planted subtly but firmly. As the heat intensified, some of the Marines began to struggle. Private Johnson staggered slightly while carrying supplies, sweat dripping into his eyes. "I'm fine," he gasped, but stepped forward instantly. "Hydrate first," he said calmly, guiding Johnson to a shaded corner and offering water. He monitored the Marine closely, noting heart rate and signs of overheating. Another Marine, Corporal Santos, groaned as he adjusted his equipment. Quietly reassured him, adjusted straps, and ensured that he could continue safely. Every action was deliberate, precise, and quietly authoritative, a stark reminder that leadership often came without ceremony or fanfare. Cole noticed the subtle glances of admiration directed at and felt a flicker of unease. "What's going on here?" he muttered to himself, stepping closer for another jab. "I said watch out for nap time, not superhero duty." Laughter followed, but it lacked the same energy as before. Something had shifted. The Marines were beginning to see as more than the quiet target of jokes. He was competent, calm, and reliable under pressure. Cole, despite himself, began to realize that the tense social dynamic was quietly but irrevocably changing. Inside, the simmering tension reached a quiet peak. He had endured teasing, judgment, and whispered speculation, all without breaking his composure. But now he saw the cracks forming in others, not in their morale, but in their assumptions. The time for subtle demonstration had arrived. He moved with renewed focus, ensuring the tent was organized. Every injured or exhausted Marine was cared for, and no task was overlooked. He understood deeply that leadership was not proven in words but in action, especially when no one else seemed to notice. Cole, oblivious to the quiet storm building, delivered one final jab before the afternoon drill. "Make sure you pace yourself, Brooks," he shouted. "Wouldn't want you to tire out before bedtime stories and snack duty." Laughter filled the tent again, but calm, deliberate stare met Cole's eyes directly. It was not anger, nor was it defiance. It was quiet certainty. For the first time that day, Cole felt the weight of his presence, an unspoken challenge that could not be dismissed with words or jokes. As the afternoon wore on, the sun bore down relentlessly, and the Marines continued their drills under his watchful eye. Minor injuries were treated immediately, heat exhaustion prevented with precise intervention, and morale subtly maintained through efficiency and care. Even as Cole's teasing continued, the Marines began to realize that there was more to than met the eye. His quiet authority was becoming impossible to ignore. By late afternoon, The tipping point had arrived. Several Marines were visibly struggling in the heat. One had stumbled slightly carrying supplies. Another had faintly complained of dizziness. Moved instantly, taking charge with a calm and confidence that far exceeded his rank. He issued instructions, delegated tasks efficiently, and stabilized each situation with the authority of someone who had faced far greater challenges in life than the heat of a desert tent. Cole watched, stunned, as became the center of attention not through jokes or mockery, but through competence, composure, and quiet leadership. And in that moment, the dynamic of the GP tent began to shift irreversibly. The laughter, once dominant, was now subdued. Cole's teasing, no matter how loud, was drowned out by the clear demonstration of his capability. The Marines, previously skeptical or amused, now recognized that respect in this tent would be earned not through humor, but through action, and Brooks had begun to earn it in spades. The day's heat pressed on, but the real battle had already been won in subtle, almost invisible ways. Quiet strength born of years of responsibility and sacrifice was now undeniable. Cole's constant jokes could no longer obscure the fact that was not just competent but exceptional in his calm authority. As the sun began its slow descent over the desert, casting long shadows across the training grounds, one thing was clear: the tent would never see the same way again. The stage was set. The day had begun with humor and ridicule, but now, under the blazing sun, his presence had begun to command attention. The Marines had begun to see him not as a target of jokes, but as a man whose strength, patience, and dedication could not be questioned. The moment of true testing was approaching, and the tent, once full of laughter, was quietly bracing itself for a demonstration of courage and competence that would stop everyone cold. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the desert encampment cloaked in shadows. The heat of the day lingered in the air, replaced by a chill that crept across the sand and into the GP tent. The Marines, exhausted but determined, were preparing for a nighttime field exercise, a simulated mission designed to test endurance, coordination, and crisis response. The day's teasing, the whispered judgments, and the simmering tension had faded into background noise, replaced by a quiet focus as everyone themselves for the drill. But what no one anticipated was how quickly chaos could erupt, and how one man would rise above it all. Staff Sergeant Cole was reviewing the exercise plan with the younger Marines, his usual bravado returning as he pointed and barked orders. "All right, team, stay sharp. This is what separates the survivors from the spectators. Keep your heads in the game." He glanced at Brooks, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "And you, Brooks, try not to fall asleep on the job tonight. Wouldn't want to disappoint your little recruits." Laughter followed, though muted compared to the day's earlier eruptions. Cole was used to commanding attention, but he couldn't shake a subtle curiosity about the quiet medic who had earned the respect of some Marines earlier in the day. Responded with a calm nod, adjusting the straps of his medical pack and surveying the tent. He reviewed the checklist silently, ensuring every kit, bandage, and piece of equipment was ready for the night's drills. Every Marine under his supervision had been accounted for, and he had memorized the potential hazards of the course. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, not for rank, not for recognition, but because he knew the consequences of being unprepared. Nights like these reminded him of life beyond the military, of Liam waiting for him at home, and of the sacrifices he had made to provide care both as a father and as a medic. As the team moved out into the field, the desert seemed to close in around them. Shadows stretched across dunes and scrub, and the faint light of the moon cast eerie shapes that played tricks on the mind. The simulated mission had begun smoothly at first. Teams moved in coordination, following Cole's instructions, clearing checkpoints and communicating with radios. But suddenly, an unexpected explosion, the result of a miscalculated training device, sent shockwaves through the team. Dust and debris filled the air, and screams of pain and confusion echoed across the terrain. Chaos erupted instantly. Marines were injured, some with burns, others with minor lacerations, and a few in shock from the blast. The well-organized drills dissolved into frantic scrambling as panic threatened to overtake discipline. Cole barked orders, but even he faltered, stunned by the intensity and suddenness of the event. Shouts collided, and the darkness of night made the chaos worse. It was in this moment, as fear and confusion spread like wildfire, that Brooks stepped forward quietly, decisively, and fully in command. His instinct was assessment. He scanned the field quickly, noting the most critically injured, the locations of hazards, and the capabilities of those still mobile. With calm authority, he issued instructions. Johnson, drag the injured to the shaded area near the ridge. Santos, monitor vital signs, keep them stable until I reach you. Martinez, begin triage rotation now, prioritize breathing and bleeding. His voice cut through the chaos, steady and unwavering. The Marines, despite their shock, followed. Something about calm decisiveness compelled obedience. It was not demanded by rank alone, but earned through clarity and competence. Cole watched, stunned, as moved from one injured Marine to another. He knelt beside the most critical casualty, assessing a deep laceration on the leg, applying pressure and bandaging with hands that were steady and confident. Another Marine, struggling to breathe after inhaling smoke from the blast, was stabilized by, who monitored pulse and respiration while giving clear, concise instructions to those nearby. Each action was deliberate, precise, and efficient. Even in the midst of chaos, calm authority began to bring order where panic had once ruled. The Marines surrounding began to respond to his presence. Those who had doubted him or laughed at his quiet demeanor found themselves following his instructions without hesitation. Private Lewis, who had whispered doubts about earlier in the day, now carried supplies exactly where directed, his movements crisp and precise. Corporal Santos, initially panicked by the explosion, executed triage rotations perfectly, guided by calm commands. The transformation was almost instantaneous. What had been a panic scene became organized, coordinated, and under control, all because of one man's quiet authority. Cole, for the first time in his career, felt a pang of genuine awe. He barked his own instructions, but they sounded hollow compared to the calm, effective leadership emanating from. He had teased, mocked, and doubted this man all day, but now, faced with competence under pressure, he realized how misplaced those judgments had been. Even as Cole maintained appearances, a deep respect began to grow, mingled with a quiet sense of humility. The man he had ridiculed was no ordinary medic, he was extraordinary. The field exercise continued, but under his watch, the casualties were stabilized and the injured cared for with remarkable efficiency. His calm authority prevented further panic and ensured that no Marine was neglected. Every command was clear, every movement precise, every intervention life-saving. Even the most skeptical Marines found themselves following his lead, their previous judgments forgotten in the face of undeniable competence. The desert night, once chaotic and threatening, was now a controlled environment, and it was all thanks to Brooks. Rare Moment paused to glance at Cole. Their eyes met, and for the first time that day, Cole's usual smirk faltered. There was no anger, no sarcasm, only quiet authority and unwavering focus in his gaze. It was a silent message. He was capable, he was prepared, and he could command respect through action rather than words. Cole, despite himself, felt the weight of that gaze, a realization that the quiet man he had teased all morning had proven himself far beyond the limits of rank or jokes. The chaos subsided and the field exercise drew to a controlled halt. Marines, still shaken but safe, began to regroup, tending to minor injuries and catching their breath. Cole approached, hesitant and uncharacteristically subdued. That was, he began, struggling to find words. Simply nodded, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Everyone's okay," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "That's what matters." No words of boast, no gestures for recognition, just competence and focus. The tent, later, would be silent with awe. Stories would be told of how the quiet medic had transformed a near disaster into a controlled operation, how his calm authority had saved lives and restored order. Cole, who had spent the day mocking him, now realized that respect could not be earned through jokes or intimidation. had earned it in the most profound way possible, through action, courage, and unshakable calm under pressure. As the night deepened and the desert air cooled, the Marines finally returned to the GP tent. Injuries treated, tasks completed, and discipline restored, the camp settled into an uneasy quiet. But the events of the evening had left an indelible mark. The laughter, teasing, and mockery of earlier hours had been replaced by admiration and a dawning awareness. True strength was not loud or ostentatious. It was quiet, consistent, and profoundly effective. Brooks, the single father and dedicated medic, had proven this beyond question. And for the first time, the entire GP tent, even the ever-loud Staff Sergeant Cole, had begun to recognize something that had been invisible all day. Was no ordinary man. He was a leader in his own right, a man whose calm, decisive actions under extreme pressure commanded respect, inspired confidence, and changed the way everyone around him would see him, and perhaps see themselves forever. The GP tent was quiet now, a stark contrast to the morning chaos and the explosive field exercise just hours earlier. Marines moved slowly, some still tending minor injuries, others checking equipment with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and the faint metallic scent of blood from scrapes and burns. But there was something else in the atmosphere, a charged anticipation, the kind that comes after witnessing true leadership in action. Staff Sergeant Cole, normally brimming with confidence and loud humor, stood near the center of the tent, arms crossed, trying to mask a rare uncertainty. The morning's teasing and ridicule now felt hollow, even foolish, compared to the events that had unfolded in the desert under moonlight. He glanced at Brooks, who was quietly inspecting medical supplies, moving deliberately from table to table, ensuring that every kit was complete, every bandage replaced, every minor injury fully treated. His calm presence radiated an authority that no rank, joke, or performance could ever match. Cole cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim some semblance of dominance. "All right, Brooks," he said, his voice louder than usual. "I think you handled tonight adequately. Not bad for a single dad running the division of our camp." Laughter erupted from a few Marines who had gathered, though it was nervous, hesitant, a reflection of their awareness that this joke, for the first time, was met with genuine weight. They remembered the chaos, the lives had stabilized, the calm he had maintained in the face of fear. Finally turned to face Cole, his dark brown eyes steady and unwavering. For the first time all day he spoke, and the tent seemed to lean in almost instinctively. His voice was calm, deliberate, and filled with authority, the kind that did not need volume to command attention. "Staff Sergeant," he began, pausing just slightly to make sure his words carried to everyone present, "you've spent all morning mocking me for being a single father, for being quiet, for being new. And that's fine. Humor has its place, but tonight lives were at stake. The lives of every Marine in this tent depended on discipline, focus, and calm execution, not jokes, not mockery, action." A hush fell over the Marines. Even Cole, usually quick with a retort or a laugh, faltered. The silence was electric, heavy with the realization that was not responding with anger or defensiveness, but with quiet authority and truth. Every Marine present, from the recruit to the seasoned sergeants, felt the weight of those words. It was more than a reprimand. It was a lesson, an unspoken challenge, and a revelation all at once. Continued, his tone even, yet imbued with a quiet intensity. "I'm a father," he said simply, and the words carried further than anyone expected. "I have responsibilities beyond this camp. I have a son who depends on me every day, and every decision I make, whether here or at home, carries weight. I don't need your approval, nor do I need to earn respect through jokes. Respect is earned through competence, care, and integrity. The things you saw tonight, that is how I lead. That is how I live." The tent was utterly silent now. Every Marine, every pair of eyes was on. The words he had chosen, calm yet powerful, had cut through the bravado, the teasing, and the hierarchy of rank. Cole's face shifted from mild shock to something that resembled humility, though he struggled to articulate it. Had not only answered the teasing, he had redefined the terms entirely, proving that respect was far more than a matter of jokes or authority. For a moment, the past hours seemed to compress into a single, crystalline understanding. The teasing, the whispers, the speculation about his personal life, all of it seemed insignificant compared to the reality of his actions and character. Every Marine present understood something fundamental. Strength was not measured in how loud you could be, or how easily you could dominate social dynamics. True strength was quiet, consistent, and manifest in moments of crisis. Cole finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Brooks, he trailed off, searching for words that could reconcile the morning's jokes with the evening's reality. The Marines around him shifted uneasily, sensing that something profound had occurred, though few could articulate exactly what it was. Even those who had laughed the hardest now nodded subtly, their expressions a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and respect. Seeing the moment's weight offered a small nod and a calm smile. "Staff Sergeant," he said, "I'll continue doing my job. My focus is on keeping everyone safe and ready. That is all I need to do. Everything else is secondary." His composure, his unwavering focus, and the quiet confidence of his words created a profound pause. The tent, which had spent the entire day echoing with laughter, now echoed with understanding, respect, and a subtle reverence. Private Lewis, who had been one of the more vocal critics earlier in the day, whispered under his breath, I get it now." Another Marine, a seasoned corporal who had watched the entire sequence unfold, nodded solemnly. "Yeah, he's the real deal," he said softly. The sentiment spread quietly like ripples across still water. Respect had been earned, silently but undeniably, through action and character. Cole, for the first time in his career, allowed himself a humble smile. He took a deep breath and addressed the tent, his voice steady but quieter than normal. "Everyone," he said, "take note. Today we witnessed something remarkable. Brooks, quiet, disciplined, and unflinchingly competent, reminded us all what real leadership looks like. He's earned our respect, and anyone who doubts that should reconsider." The Marines nodded, murmuring agreement, some even clapping softly in recognition. Did not seek acknowledgement. He simply returned to his duties, quietly inspecting the remaining supplies and ensuring the tent was in order. But the effect of his words and actions lingered, palpable in the air. Staff Sergeant Cole, usually the center of attention, now understood that some forms of authority were beyond jokes, beyond rank. They existed in action, integrity, and quiet courage. In that moment, the entire GP tent transformed. Laughter and banter would return eventually, but the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. His quiet strength had commanded attention, stopped teasing Cole, and established him as a figure whose presence and competence could not be ignored. Every Marine in the tent, from the recruit to the most seasoned sergeant, recognized that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned, and had done so in the most profound, undeniable way. As night fully settled over the desert, the camp grew still. The lessons of the day, the teasing, the panic, the calm authority, hung in the air like invisible banners. Brooks, the single father and medic, had proven that strength and leadership were not loud or performative. They were quiet, consistent, and deeply impactful. And for the first time, Staff Sergeant Cole, usually unshakable in humor and authority, truly understood what it meant to respect someone. Not for their rank, not for their bravado, but for their character, courage, and unwavering dedication. The night ended with a subtle shift in the GP tent. Conversations were quieter, smiles more genuine, and the teasing that had dominated the day was replaced with glances of acknowledgement and respect. Returned to his pack, methodically preparing for the next day, while Marines who had once doubted him now followed his example silently, inspired by the quiet demonstration of leadership and courage they had witnessed. And in that quiet moment, allowed himself the briefest thought of Liam, picturing his son sleeping soundly at home. The love and responsibility he carried as a father had shaped him into this man, a man who could stop an entire GP tent cold with nothing more than integrity, courage, and calm action. The night had revealed who he truly was, and no joke, no teasing, and no rank could ever diminish that truth. The night after the field exercise was quieter than usual. The desert had cooled, and a thin layer of fog began to form near the horizon, softening the harsh edges of the encampment. The GP tent, once filled with the clamor of teasing, panic, and instructions, now hummed with a different energy, a combination of relief, reflection, and a newfound respect that could not be spoken lightly. The Marines moved slowly, checking supplies and tending to minor injuries, their movements deliberate and thoughtful. Staff Sergeant Cole, normally the loud center of attention, lingered near the entrance of the tent, arms crossed but expression subdued. He had spent the evening replaying the events of the field exercise in his mind, each moment of chaos and every act of calm intervention by Brooks leaving an impression that was impossible to ignore. The teasing and mockery that had dominated the morning seemed trivial now, almost embarrassing in retrospect. He watched quietly as moved among the Marines, his presence steady, calm, and commanding, a quiet authority that drew attention without a single word of boast or performance. Private Lewis, still recovering from heat exhaustion and adrenaline, leaned against a supply crate and spoke softly to a nearby Marine. "I can't believe how calm he was, even when people were screaming and running. He didn't panic at all." The other Marine nodded, eyes wide. "Yeah, and the way he coordinated everyone, like he could see exactly what needed to happen before it even happened. I've never seen anything like it." Around the tent, similar murmurs circulated, a quiet acknowledgement that something remarkable had occurred. Cole approached, who was carefully checking bandages and restocking medical supplies, his movements deliberate and precise. "Brooks," Cole began, his voice quieter than usual. I wanted to say something earlier, but—" He paused, searching for the right words, glanced up, meeting Cole's gaze with the same calm, unwavering expression that had defined him all day. "It's fine," said simply. "We did what needed to be done. That's all that matters." Cole shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "No, you don't get it. I've been in the field for years and I've seen a lot, but tonight was different. You didn't just handle a crisis, you controlled it. You saved people. You earned respect the hard way, and I owe you an apology for earlier, for everything this morning." Nodded, accepting the apology with quiet grace. It was not the recognition he sought, but he understood its importance to Cole and the tent. The other Marines watched, some awkwardly, some with subtle admiration. A few younger soldiers who had been the loudest in their teasing earlier approached cautiously. Private, for example, stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you, for tonight, for everything. You really kept us together when things got bad," smiled faintly. "You did your part too. Teamwork is what saved everyone tonight, not just one person." Even in his humility, the impact of his leadership was undeniable. As the night wore on, conversations around the tent shifted. Laughter returned, but it was softer, tinged with respect rather than mockery. Marines who had previously whispered doubts about now shared stories of his actions during the exercise, recounting moments of calm decisiveness, strategic thinking, and courage under pressure. The initial skepticism had transformed into admiration, a recognition that quiet demeanor masked an extraordinary capacity for leadership and resilience. Cole, still absorbing the reality of what had happened, made a decision that would forever change the dynamic of the tent. He addressed the group, voice steady and firm. "Listen up, everyone. This morning I made jokes at someone's expense. I mocked a man for being a single father, for being quiet, for being new to the unit. Tonight that same man proved what real leadership looks like. Brooks, quiet, steady, and capable, has earned every ounce of our respect. Let's make sure we show it starting now." The tent fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. One by one, Marines began to nod, murmuring agreements. Some stepped forward to offer verbal acknowledgement. Others simply watched with a newfound appreciation that didn't require words. The dynamic that had been defined by teasing and judgment was now fundamentally changed. Actions had not only earned respect, but they had also redefined the standard by which competence and leadership were measured in the tent. Cole lingered nearby, observing how the Marines interacted with. He noticed subtle shifts, younger soldiers consulting him for advice, seasoned medics respecting his suggestions without question, and even those who had initially mocked him now following his lead instinctively. It was a quiet revolution of perception, and Cole realized that he had underestimated the depth of character, courage, and competence that possessed. For his part, continued his work with methodical precision. He treated minor injuries, restocked medical kits, and checked vital supplies. But beneath the surface, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The events of the day had tested him in ways that went beyond drills and exercises. They had tested his patience, his composure, and his ability to command respect without relying on rank or intimidation. In every interaction, he had proven that leadership was measured by action, integrity, and care, not by loud words or theatrics. Later, as the Marines settled into a more relaxed rhythm, took a moment to speak privately with a few of the younger soldiers. He offered guidance, advice, and encouragement, emphasizing the importance of preparation, teamwork, and calm decision-making under pressure. His words were soft, but their impact was profound. The soldiers listened intently, absorbing lessons that would stay with them far longer than any drill or lecture. Even Cole found himself quietly absorbing wisdom. He watched as the man he had teased and underestimated continued to lead by example, without seeking attention or accolades. The contrast between Cole's loud bravado and his quiet competence could not have been clearer. For the first time, he understood that true respect was earned, not demanded, and that some of the most powerful leaders were those who led without the need for recognition or spectacle. By the early hours of the morning, the tent had regained a sense of order and calm. The Marines were resting, repairing supplies, and reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The air, once heavy with tension and uncertainty, now carried a sense of unity, admiration, and quiet inspiration. Brooks, the single father, the quiet medic, had reshaped the perception of every Marine in the tent. His actions had transcended jokes, rank, and assumptions, leaving a lasting impression that would endure far beyond that night. Before leaving the tent for a brief rest, allowed himself one thought of Liam. He pictured his son sleeping peacefully at home, unaware of the events that had unfolded. The thought brought a small smile to his face. All the sacrifice, the balancing of responsibilities, and the perseverance through doubt and judgment had a purpose. Every action he had taken in the desert tonight was an extension of the care and love he bore for his son. And in that quiet, fleeting moment, felt a profound sense of fulfillment. As dawn approached, the Marines began to stir, preparing for the day ahead. Conversations were quiet but respectful, punctuated by smiles and subtle nods toward. Staff Sergeant Cole, finally at ease, approached him once more. "Brooks, I think I speak for everyone when I say we've learned a lot from you tonight. You've changed how we see strength, leadership, and respect. Thank you." Nodded, his calm expression unchanged, but the respect in his eyes reflected the shared understanding of what had transpired. The GP tent, once dominated by teasing, mockery, and judgment, had transformed. It now hummed with admiration, unity, and a shared recognition of what true leadership and courage looked like. Brooks had earned something far more valuable than acknowledgement. He had earned the trust, respect, and admiration of every Marine in the tent. And in doing so, he had quietly demonstrated that true strength is measured not by rank or bravado, but by competence, integrity, and unwavering calm under pressure. The desert morning was cooler, the first light stretching across the GP tent and illuminating the sand in soft, golden hues. The air smelled faintly of smoke from the previous night's exercises, mixed with the subtle tang of disinfectant and dust. Inside the tent, the Marines moved with quiet efficiency, unpacking supplies, checking gear, and tending to minor injuries with the same disciplined calm that had marked the aftermath of the previous night. But beneath the surface, a subtle, profound change lingered, one that had transformed the atmosphere of the tent permanently. Staff Sergeant Cole stood near the entrance, surveying the scene with a rare contemplative expression. He had spent the night reflecting on Brooks, replaying every moment of the field exercise, every act of calm decisiveness, and every word spoken in the tent after the chaos. Cole had gone into the desert that morning certain of his dominance, confident in his loud humor and authority. Yet by dawn, he realized that leadership was far more than the sum of jokes, rank, or bravado. Had taught the entire unit an invaluable lesson, without even intending to. For his part, continued his routine with methodical precision. He checked every medical kit, replaced bandages, and reviewed the inventory. Yet, unlike the prior days, he noticed subtle gestures of acknowledgement from the Marines around him. A private would hand him a clean bandage with a nod. A corporal would quietly follow his instructions without question. The respect which had once been or mocked now flowed organically, unspoken but unmistakable. He did not seek it, but he accepted its presence as a natural outcome of his actions and integrity. Cole approached him cautiously, his usual swagger replaced by a thoughtful demeanor. "Brooks," he said, his voice calm, almost reverent, I wanted to make sure you understand something. Last night you didn't just lead, you inspired. You changed how every Marine in this tent, including me, sees strength, responsibility, and courage. I can't apologize enough for the way I treated you this morning." Gave a small, composed nod. "It's okay, Staff Sergeant. I knew your teasing came from habit, not malice. What matters is what we do in the moment, and tonight everyone pulled through. That's what counts." Even in his humility, his words carried authority. The tent had learned a lesson in courage and calm leadership that could not be taught by rank alone. Every Marine present, from the recruit to the seasoned sergeant, had witnessed that respect is earned through actions, integrity, and the ability to remain composed when chaos erupts. For many, it was a moment that would remain etched in memory long after deployments, exercises, and daily routines had faded. The younger Marines who had once whispered doubts and joined in teasing now sought guidance from. Private Lewis approached him nervously. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you for everything, for showing us what real leadership looks like. I learned more from tonight than I have in weeks of drills." Smiled faintly, his voice calm and reassuring. "Remember, leadership isn't about being loud or getting attention. It's about responsibility, awareness, and consistency. Every action you take has an impact, and every decision matters." Even seasoned corporals and lieutenants took note, quietly observing his interactions and applying his subtle lessons to their own leadership. The tent, once dominated by casual mockery, now functioned under a quiet, respectful rhythm. Communication was smoother, morale higher, and every Marine seemed more attentive, more deliberate, and more aware of the consequences of their actions. The incident had become more than a story of a field exercise. It had become a benchmark for professionalism, courage, and calm authority. Cole, observing the transformation, realized the deeper truth. For too long, he had equated leadership with loudness, humor, and dominance. He had been mistaken. Brooks, with his quiet demeanor, steady hands, and unwavering focus, had demonstrated that true leadership is not about attention or rank, but about competence, care, and the courage to act decisively in moments of crisis. It was a lesson Cole would carry with him long after leaving this camp. Later, as the tent began to settle into a semblance of routine, took a brief moment alone. He closed his eyes, thinking of his son Liam, who was probably waking up at home unaware of the day's trials. Felt a quiet pride, not for recognition or accolades, but for the knowledge that he had upheld his responsibilities both as a medic and as a father. His son, he knew, was the reason he had cultivated the patience, calm, and resilience that had carried him through the previous day's chaos. Every decision, every act of care, every calm word had been shaped by the responsibilities of parenthood. The rest of the Marines returned gradually, carrying themselves differently now. They no longer saw as a quiet newcomer to be mocked. He had earned their admiration, trust, and respect. Whispers of awe replaced the teasing, and the atmosphere of camaraderie deepened. Veterans who had initially dismissed him began to consult with him, recognizing that his judgment and composure were assets in any crisis. Even the youngest recruits, inspired by his calm authority, began to emulate his measured approach to tasks and challenges. Cole approached one final time before leaving the tent for the morning briefing. "Brooks," he said quietly, "I know you don't want recognition, but I think it's safe to say you've changed the way we all see things around here. I'll make sure the chain of command knows, too. People like you, they need to be noticed even if they don't ask for it." Simply nodded, a faint, serene smile on his face. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. The focus should always be on the team. That's what matters." As the Marines filed out of the tent toward their morning assignments, a subtle but unmistakable energy had taken root. The lessons of the previous night, calmness under pressure, responsibility, quiet competence, and integrity, had become part of the unit's collective consciousness. Conversations were thoughtful, gestures more deliberate, and every action carried a sense of purpose. In many ways, Brooks had transformed not only the tent's respect for him, but also the culture of the unit itself. Weeks later, the story of the night's field exercise became a part of camp legend. Veterans recounted it to new recruits, emphasizing the lessons learned and the leadership demonstrated. Cole, once the loudest voice of authority in the tent, became a quiet advocate of the values had. He taught others to notice calm competence, to respect integrity, and to understand that leadership is more about action than rank. The impact of his presence reverberated far beyond a single night or a single exercise. It became a standard by which Marines would measure courage and leadership for years to come. However, remained quietly himself. He continued to perform his duties with the same diligence, humility, and care. Recognition was secondary, though it came naturally. For him, the true reward was in the trust and respect he had earned, the lives he had protected, and the example he had set not only for the Marines around him, but for the son waiting at home, who had unknowingly inspired every act of courage and calm that had defined the past day. And so, in the quiet of the desert, under the fatting glow of dawn, the GP tent returned to routine, but it was forever changed. The laughter, the banter, and even the teasing of earlier days were replaced by a culture of respect, discipline, and appreciation for what true leadership looks like. Brooks, the single father and steadfast medic, had not only survived the chaos, he had reshaped it, leaving an indelible mark on every Marine who had witnessed his courage, his calm, and his unwavering integrity. By the end of the day, it was clear. Actions, not words, define respect. Courage is measured in quiet competence, and leadership at its truest inspires and transforms without the need for recognition. The story of Brooks would live on, a testament to the power of calm under pressure, the weight of responsibility, and the enduring strength of character. And for every Marine in that tent, the lesson was unforgettable. Some leaders don't shout, they act, and sometimes that is enough to stop the world around them cold.